Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And our Oakland A's are just past the midway point of this 2037 season, preparing for the first-year player draft today. The season going very well. We've got the best record in baseball at 60-29 as we try to defend our second World Series championship over the course of this playthrough. Interestingly, we've got a little bit of disappointing news as far as our finances are concerned. Although we've been selling out every game this year, and as I noted, we've got the best record in baseball, 6.5 up in the division. Our fan interest has actually deteriorated by 1 point over the course of the season. Given, as I noted, that we've literally basically sold out every game, and we've got the best record in baseball, and we are the defending World Series champions, I don't really know what else they can be expecting us to do to keep fan interest high, but did just notice that unfortunately we have lost a point since the last time we checked in on that number, which I believe was right at the start of this month, so just 10 games ago. And it's certainly not our performance in the month of July, I would think, that would be causing any deterioration in fan interest, since we've actually got a 7-2 record in the 9 games we've already played this month. But it is what it is at this point. We are functioning pretty well in terms of health right now. Our superstar Jake Ortega has been out for almost a month now with that broken kneecap, and he is unfortunately going to miss the rest of the season, but still feeling pretty good about this team. But we're going to turn our attention from the present to the future right now and focus on hopefully adding some players who will help us keep this team competitive 5, 10, 15 years into the future in the draft. And before we get into some of the top prospects and who we're ultimately going to select with our first overall pick, which is 26th overall in the draft, I want to thank the Worldwide Scouting Department for once again taking a look at some of the options available and sharing your thoughts with us. Always helpful to hear what you're thinking, and make a plug for the channel now. If you're a member of the Worldwide Scouting Department, or you're just a loyal viewer of the channel, or even a first-time viewer of the channel, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, would sincerely appreciate that, and always appreciate a comment or a thumbs up if you're enjoying what we're trying to do here with these Oakland Athletics. And sometimes when we tap into the Worldwide Scouting Department ahead of a draft or ahead of the IAFA period, there's a lot of variation in the opinions we get. In this situation, there was a lot of consistency in the views of the Worldwide Scouting Department. Broadly, the Worldwide Scouting Department favored us going with a pitcher. There are still, as you can see, several relatively interesting and high potential hitters available. Avery Shayam did suggest possibly going with Steve Payne, the highest rated prospect on the board. He's also the recommendation of our scout, not surprisingly, who has him rated as the highest potential prospect. Payne, a center fielder, good outfield range, good speed, potentially prodigious home run power, potentially excellent gap power, and a really good eye. The question is his contact and the number of strikeouts, but the left-handed hitting 18-year-old center fielder certainly is one of the more interesting position player prospects out there. The other two highest rated were Tyrell Mauch, another center fielder with excellent power and an outstanding eye, fragile physically, not quite as fast and not quite as good defensively as Mr. Payne is, but he's also at a lower price tag. And then the shortstop Jorge Quijada if it weren't for the really negative personality, he'd be more interesting to me. We think he could be above average at everything hitting wise, with really nice range in the infield and decent speed. And then between Greg Grace, Edgar Hermosillo, Jadavian Minnick, Steve Neal, and Greg Stockwell, there's also five four-star prospects. I did misspeak. There was a second batter that was favored by some of the scouts, and that is the center fielder Greg Grace, the 21-year-old out of Florida State. Both Paul West and DLL First Base 14 suggest that if we're going to go with a position player, Mr. Magnificent may be the way to go. Pretty solid defensive outfielder, pretty good speed, and a potentially interesting bat with above average contact and gap power, as well as home run power and an eye that are probably more in the average type of range. So definitely some interesting position players out there. Some of the names that we did just talk about are expected to be going now or very shortly from now. Tyrell Mock is who was mocked to us. Jorge Quijada, not far behind. Steve Payne, not far behind either. And when we start getting into the top of the second round, Steve Neal, Greg Grace, some of the other names that are on the relatively short list of prospects that we might be considering. The shortstop Jadavian Minnick expected to go with us with our 25th pick in the second round. So have some interesting decisions to make, but it's not just all about batters. There's some interesting pitchers out there as well. We noted in the end of the last episode that among high schoolers, we liked Kevin Zamudio the best, 18-year-old starter out of Pennsylvania. I think his stuff and his movement could both be well above average, only average control. Solid stamina, not good at holding on runners, mixed personality, but a potentially really interesting four-pitch arsenal if everything develops for Zamudio. Chris Jensen is the other guy that we mentioned as being pretty interesting, 22-year-old out of Grambling. Good stamina, decent at holding on runners, extreme ground ball tendencies, and he throws in the mid to high 90s. Potential four-pitch arsenal, has some work to do on the changeup. Don't necessarily think that any of his pitches are going to be exceptional. So his stuff maybe just a little bit above average, but think he could have above average movement and average control when all is said and done. As I noted in the last episode, although I like both Zamudio and Jensen, the mock draft suggests we've got time. Zamudio not expected to go to the final pick in the 5th round, and honestly, Jensen not much before him, expected to go 16th in the 4th round. So I do like to use the mock draft as a guide at times, and this year it would certainly suggest waiting on the pitchers and perhaps focusing on the position players. But we have actually seen, particularly with college players in recent drafts, that they have often gone significantly higher than the mock draft projects them. So I don't want to put too much stake in that if we decide that Jensen is the path we want to go. And according to the Worldwide Scouting Department, Jensen is the direction to go. Dodo Dude, Hold Door, Alkshi, Jarek Braxton, Paul West, DLL First Base 14, Coach 1549, new member of the Worldwide Scouting Department, Right Slow, all suggested Jensen was the guy. Kevin McDowell said, don't wait. Calvin Huss said, maybe you can wait. But overall, Jensen was the overwhelming pick of the Worldwide Scouting Department. And given that we have seen in previous drafts that some of these college players who we thought we might be able to wait on have tended to go closer to when we think they should go as opposed to where the mock draft puts them. We're not going to fool around. We're going to go with Jensen here. Do like the well-developed prospect. The only knock I have on him is that I think that control is most likely only going to be average. Certainly would love it if it was better than that, but still think that average control with stuff and movement that hopefully will be average to a bit above, good stamina, a 4-pitch arsenal, and a ball that touches the high 90s when he's throwing his fastball could be a pretty useful pitcher for us. And if we have a little bit of luck in the development lab over the next few years, could move from being a good solid mid to back of the rotation guy to maybe someone who's more of a closer to a top of the rotation kind of guy. So definitely leaning towards Jensen being the choice. Going to spend just a bit more time making sure I haven't missed anybody, but think I'm inclined to follow the suggestions of the Worldwide Scouting Department here in 2037. And we are going to follow the recommendation of the Worldwide Scouting Department. Go with Chris Jensen here in the first round. Zamudio, likely, at least according to the mock draft, may drop to us. And although I like several of the position players, I'm not in love with any of them. And although most of them are expected to start coming off the board relatively soon, in the next 10 or 15 picks, long before we'll be picking again, my hunch is that there might be some interesting options there as well. But given that we like Jensen the best, the Worldwide Scouting Department likes Jensen the best, and we do have this recent experience where college pitchers in particular seem to be going earlier in the actual draft than they go in the mock draft, we are not going to fool around. Welcome to the Oakland Athletics organization, Chris Jensen. Second consecutive year we've taken a college pitcher with our first pick. So now we'll auto draft till the second round. Kevin Zamudio is still there, as well as Joe Heilman, the reliever. We weren't going to take a reliever that high, worried about his control, but his stuff could be absolutely devastating. Throws close to the triple digits. So Heilman and Zamudio, both still very interesting options to have on the board here. Looks like a couple of college pitchers as well, the one with the highest potential. A reliever, Orek Stopchik. Don't love the lack of movement and lack of control or some of the personality traits with him, so can't rule out bringing him on board, but certainly not going to be on the top of our list. Taking a look at the hitters that are available, just a couple of the higher rated guys left at this point. So I think there were 8 or 9 4-star or higher players on the board, and only the shortstop Edgar Hermosillo still on the board. Like his personality, a glove that can play multiple infield positions, decent speed. Like the contact and power combination. Don't love the fact that he's likely going to struggle to draw a lot of walks. And then Greg Sockwell, center fielder, good contact, good gap power, pretty good speed, decent range in the outfield. Switch hitter is not an entirely uninteresting prospect either, but there's a lot of other guys that I want to spend some time scouting offline before we ultimately make a decision. Interestingly, Jadavian Minich, the guy who was projected to go to us with the 25th pick in the second round, only went one pick before we would have had the opportunity to pick him as well. Taking a look at the draft log, we'll see where some of the other guys that we were thinking about ended up going after our pick. Center fielders Grace and Payne went 28th and 29th. The shortstop Quijada went 31st overall. Tyrell Mock went with a supplemental first-round pick. Can't necessarily remember all of the other players that we were looking at. I know there was some center fielders and some infielders in the mix. Obviously, Minnick went with the 24th pick, but still some interesting players on the board for us to think about. We'll spend some time offline thinking about it. The scouting director recommends Edgar Hermosillo. If we were to go with a pitcher, he recommends the youngster Zamudio. And while I'm intrigued by both of the pitchers, Heilman and Zamudio, it turns out the OSA is significantly less enthusiastic about both players than our scout. To me, that's not a reason not to pick them. I've got a lot of confidence in our scout, but you can see the high schooler Zamudio looks a lot less interesting in the OSA reports than our head scout thinks he does in terms of his upside. And given that he's projected to go at the end of the 5th round, we're going to be patient and hope that Heilman or Zamudio continue to fall. I really like both Sockwell and Hermosillo, and there's actually a lot of interesting 3.5-star players who are available, hoping some of them might fall to us as we move forward into the 3rd, 4th, if we get lucky, maybe even 5th rounds. Sockwell, pretty clean prospect, good speed, good outfield range, not the most talented defensive player and does have low leadership, so he's not a perfectly clean prospect, but like the contact with good gap power, switch hitter, always interesting. But I also like Hermosillo, some positive personality traits, solid speed, although not quite as fast as Stockwell, solid defensive player who, as we talked about, can play a lot of positions, could certainly play just about anywhere in the outfield. You know, not an ideal center fielder and not an ideal major league shortstop, but he can certainly play those positions if he needed to. Really intrigued by that potentially excellent home run power for a middle infielder to go with good contact. Don't love the very mediocre eye that we think he's going to have. Actually, mediocre might be ambitious. It could actually be a bad eye in terms of his ability to draw walks. The gap power, not exceptional either. But an infielder with decent speed who can basically play any position on the field except catcher, first base. He's obviously got the skill to play, even though he's only 5'11". With that pop in his bat, I think our scouting director has it right with Hermosillo, and we are going to go ahead and draft him as well. Move on to the 3rd round, and Sockwell is still out there, so that's pretty interesting to me. Pitcher-wise, actually Zamudio went. That's surprising. The high schooler, we did like him. As we saw, didn't seem as if the OSA was as high on him as our scout was, but clearly somebody else was, because he went in the late 2nd or early 3rd round rather than the late 5th as he was projected. Go back through and see where Zamudio actually went. Yeah, the 9th pick in this 3rd round. So he will be a member of the Orioles organization. As much as we're interested in Heilman, and as much as we're glad to see several of these other 3.5-star prospects out there, we really liked Sockwell in the 2nd round. Thought it was pretty close to a toss-up between him and Hermosillo. Scouting director recommends Sockwell, and that is the direction we are going to go as well here in the 3rd. Sim ahead to the 4th. Still some players that we like available batting-wise. And pitching-wise, the reliever Heilman is still available as well. And after taking some time offline to research the players, the 3.5-star potential guys that we were most excited about are actually all gone. That said, there's still somebody that we like more than Heilman. I'm going to roll the dice. I think if Heilman is around in the 5th round, we will bring the flame-throwing relief prospect on board. But I like Micah Barkman, a 17-year-old center fielder, potentially above average contact, gap power, and home run power. Another guy who doesn't have the greatest eye in the world. Certainly don't want to get a significant trend going of bringing guys who don't draw walks, but he's got decent speed. Looks like he could be a competent corner outfield. Don't necessarily love the low leadership, but the personality isn't a train wreck. The left-handed hitter is just 17 years old. He's actually not our scouting recommendation. Scout recommends Eric Shepard, a 18-year-old starting pitcher, but his profile is not all that exciting to me. A type of guy might be interesting to take in a couple of rounds, but seems a little bit of a reach to me here in the 4th. So we're going to go with the center fielder Barkman in the 4th, and we'll hope that Heilman is still around for our next pick. And he is still on the board. So although the OSA is not as high on him as we are, fact remains he's 18 years old and he's already reaching triple digits on the radar gun. We think his fastball and his splitter could both be exceptional. The stuff could be absolutely devastating with him. Has some work to do with his movement and potentially has a lot of work to do with his control. But for a 5th round pick, I really like the value that I think Heilman provides, and we're going to go with him in round number 5. And we've now made offers to our top 5 draftees. Fortunately, Jensen was looking for a lot less than slot, which helped. A lot of the other guys were looking for a bit more. We had extra money to begin with, so we've got the ability here in the 6th and subsequent rounds to perhaps chase after some guys looking for a little bit more money. Our pick here in the 6th round is the 3rd baseman, Jorge Flores, a guy that we've been looking at the last few rounds. Like his durability, like his bat as a 3rd baseman, potentially really interesting contact and above average home run power. With that 60 range and 65 arm, he has a nice profile for a 3rd baseman. It's 6'6", looks like he could be a brilliant defensive 1st baseman. Don't love the low leadership and adaptability, although he is smart. Typically, we try to avoid negative personality traits as much as possible, but for a 6th round prospect, to me, Flores is pretty interesting. Interestingly, our scout actually recommends a different player named Flores, Edgar Flores, a starting pitching prospect, 17 years old. He does not look all that interesting to me, and we are going to go with Jorge Flores here in the 6th. If I do anything else in the coming rounds that I think is particularly interesting, we'll certainly check back in and mention it to you. And we actually do still have a guy that we're moderately interested on the board in the 7th round, the final 3.5-star prospect, the catcher Vince Jacobs. Pretty interesting bat for a catcher. Don't love the glove at all. Obviously, that could get better. But he is a switch hitter who we think could have above average contact and well above average home run power if he reached his full potential. He's also a guy who at 6'3" could conceivably play 1st base for us, so maybe a little more positional versatility given that that glove probably isn't ideal, in my opinion, at catcher. Think that although he's looking for a little bit of money, not going to be crippling for us, particularly with the fact that we saved so much on our 1st round choice. So Jacobs is the choice here in the 7th round. And again, If I feel like I do anything interesting over these next 13 rounds before we finish off the draft, I will check back in and let you know. And unfortunately, nothing else that interesting happened over the last 13 rounds of the draft. But all things considered, I think we've got a pretty well-balanced class. As we talked about, we did offer Flores and Jacobs more than slot with their demands. But given that we were so far under slot with the college pitcher Jensen out of Grambling, as well as the reliever Heilman, our first and fifth round picks in terms of the offers, made up for the fact that we needed to pay those guys a little more and also pay some of the other guys more. I think a pretty well-balanced class when all is said and done. Really like the college starter, like the 100-mile-an-hour throwing 18-year-old reliever. With Hermosillo and Flores, we got a couple infielders coming on board. Sockwell and Barkman, a couple of outfield prospects, and then Vince Jacobs is a catcher, although realistically maybe a more likely first base / DH type down the line for us if he completely develops. So pleased with the draft, and pleased here as I'm working on this episode, getting late on Tuesday evening. Aaron Judge just blasted a 2-run home run to give the Yankees a 6-2 lead in real-world baseball over the Guardians. So we're closing in on potentially heading to Cleveland up 2-0 in the American League Championship Series, as my long-beloved Yankees perhaps inch a bit closer to their first World Series appearance in 15 years. 15 years ago, I did get to go to a game in that World Series. Obviously, the last time I went to a Yankees World Series game, and the last time I've been to any World Series game, period. And before we finish up this episode, I'm not actually going to move forward at all because I've spent a decent amount of time offline since the last episode, not just looking at players to potentially pick up in the draft, but also some potential trade targets for us. And we have some interesting options out there. I've typically been using the controversial closer Candon Reisinger as a player who has a little bit more trade value than you might expect for a guy that we signed to a 1-year contract at $1.4 million. He hasn't been brilliant for us this year, but as has been noted by a commenter, and I apologize, I forget who made the comment, but it was an astute one that they felt like he was getting better every month, and he certainly has. 7.20 ERA in April, 4.32 in May, 3.52 in June, and hasn't allowed a run in 2 appearances, 2 innings pitched here in July. So he is kind of heating up and pitching better as the weather gets warmer. But still, don't love that personality in the clubhouse, especially with the disruptive personality type that he has. He is fragile, and although he's been better more recently, his overall performance hasn't been great. And as I noted, there is some trade value with Reisinger. As we talked about last episode when we did our midseason review, it felt to me like maybe moving on from Reisinger, maybe looking for help at catcher, possibly looking for help at third base were directions we could go. And there are some interesting-ish options out there that I want to at least get in front of the worldwide scouting department. Anyone who's inclined to share some thoughts with me would love to get some feedback. 2 of the guys are relatively easy to pick up, and 1 is exceedingly expensive. We'll talk about the 2 guys that are cheaper first. And the veteran first baseman Kobe Mayo, 35 years old now with the Atlanta Braves, making really big money this year, but the Orioles have retained 40% of that contract. So we could certainly bring him on board, and we could probably get the Braves to keep a big chunk of his contract. He's a first baseman, but we would be viewing him as a third baseman. He's got competent range and a gun for an arm at third base. He's fragile physically, and as we mentioned, 35 years old. Batting-wise, he's got a 127 career WRC plus, but at the age of 35 this year, he's been a below-average offensive player, barely a win above replacement. But he does still have above-average home run power and a pretty good eye. He's got 12 homers and 287 at-bats and 49 walks. And he would also give us a captain personality. And we've kind of talked about the fact that we had kept Jason DeCaro in the rotation a little longer than we would have liked to ensure that we had that captain personality in the clubhouse. And we've now got Jason DeCaro in a co-closer role with Reisinger to kind of ensure that we get some kind of benefit from that captain personality. But bring in the veteran Mayo on board as a rental for this year and then possibly next year if he opts into that contract. But again, 40% of it is taken if he does do that. Would be a way to, I think, still upgrade at third base. Although he's hitting just 206 this year, he does walk and he does hit home runs. And I think he'd certainly be a more productive offensive player than what we've gotten from Rodney Mesidor at third base. As I said, that captain personality would allow us to move DeCaro just into more of a setup or middle relief role in the bullpen and not feel forced to continue with him in a more prominent role on our pitching staff. But we'd have to give up Reisinger to bring him on board, and that would open up a hole in the bullpen. And you can see there's, interestingly, not too many players that we can get for him. Reisinger's got decent value. There's only a handful of other guys, some of the top players on our team, or some of the better prospects in our organization, in the case of the closer Daniel Blanco and the recently promoted Chuck Huntley, that could bring Mayo on board. So expensive, and it opens up a hole in our closer role with Reisinger to bring Mayo on board. That said, he still would be a nice upgrade from what we've gotten offensively from Rodney Mesidor, who's put up a 74 WRC plus. Better range and a much better error rating for Mesidor, but his arm is not quite as good, and he clearly doesn't have the home run power or the batting eye that Kobe Mayo does. But Mayo is not the only option out there at third base. Anulfo Dolan, different profile, solid defensively also, and interestingly, he also does give us that captain personality, so he'd give us the flexibility that we need to not force DeCaro into the lineup. The 24-year-old was the 7th overall pick just 6 years ago. He's spent part of the last 4 seasons in the majors with the Guardians. Part of the last 3 seasons in the majors with the Guardians. He's been a below-average offensive player over the course of his career. But he is a switch hitter that we think could get a little bit better. And he does have that captain personality, similar-ish defense to what we've gotten thus far from Mr. Mesidor. And he's a guy who's still going to be making the minimum next year. So Dolan is interesting to me. Switch hitting third baseman. I don't think he's a superstar, but again, he's a guy that we could bring on board, get a captain personality in the lineup, and potentially upgrade third base a bit. The trade options for him are a bit more expansive than they are for Mayo. Clearly, we found this all out when we were shopping Reisinger. But you can see that we could also give up Luis Taveras, who's basically a fifth outfielder for us at this point. Now, he's an outstanding fifth outfielder who's put up a 138 WRC plus for us. But Taveras is a guy who's going to be set to making $8 million next year in arbitration. So certainly unlikely that he's going to be back with us next year. Don't necessarily, and we can also give up, the catcher Ackley or Boakai, either of our catchers. Nate Bennett, who is a guy who we picked in the third round 6 years ago. Like his glove, like his speed, just don't know what the bat really is, although he's put up a 119 WRC plus in AAA. So there's options to bring Dolan on board. Now, he's more than 10 years younger than Mayo. He's not fragile physically. He certainly doesn't have the same kind of bat as Mayo, but he looks like he's a solid major league third baseman. He's solid defensively, good arm, a respectable bat. Doesn't have much home run power. 18 homers and 983 at-bats, and only a couple this year. But given how strong the rest of our offense is, bringing on a solid, cheap guy who does have that captain personality and could help in the clubhouse is another lever that I'm thinking about pressing if we do decide to move on from Reisinger. And again, with Dolan, we don't even need to necessarily move on from Reisinger to bring him on board. But I've also been exploring a much more ambitious option for the bullpen if we do turn out that we want to move on from Reisinger, and that would be the closer Lelius Arps of the Blue Jays organization. Well above average stuff, above average movement, average control. Potentially has a three-pitch arsenal, and he has been a starter for good chunks of his major league career. 26-year-old is fragile physically, has some positive personality traits, and over the course of his major league career has put up a 107 ERA plus and an 85 FIP minus. Interestingly, he's having by far the worst year of his major league career here at the age of 26 in his fourth season. He's moved out of the rotation and into a closer role with the Blue Jays recently, but think he would certainly be an upgrade from Reisinger in terms of his stuff and also in terms of his personality. He is a guy that's going to be arbitration eligible next year, but the salary is not imposing. The issue with Lelius Arps is that if we try to trade for him, we can't get him for Reisinger. And you can see the only guys we can get straight up with him are Chase Dora and Jesus Saldana, arguably our top two starting pitchers, or the great second baseman Alejandro Landin. So Arps, to get a deal done, we realistically would need to ultimately put in a guy like Reisinger, one prime grade A type prospect, and another solid prospect, kind of get the deal done from the time I've spent with it. So Arps would be a much more expensive path to go down. But if we decided that we wanted to use Mr. Reisinger in a trade to bring on a Dolan or a Mayo, I think there are options where if we use a blue chip prospect, and as I said, a good solid major leaguer, maybe someone like the outfielder Taveras, and then a secondary prospect or two, we can bring Arps on board. So there's part of me that thinks if we're really going to try to revamp this team, we make the trade for Arps to arguably upgrade our closer position for this year, move on from Reisinger, and then also bring on someone who could upgrade us at third base, whether that's Dolan or Mayo, who knows. But wanted to at least share a couple of the things I'm thinking about on the trade market with the Worldwide Scouting Department. If you've got any thoughts on the third baseman, whether you have preferences for one over the other, given that the price for those two is pretty similar, would love to hear those. And again, Arps in the context of a top-notch blue chip prospect in our organization, somebody like Tavares or Reisinger, and then another good but not great prospect. Do you think that price is too much? Or given that we are in a situation where we are trying to have the best record in baseball and trying to repeat as champions, should be we willing to pay up for a guy like Arps, who likely could be an important member of our bullpen for several years to come, with a better personality than Mr. Reisinger has? So a lot for me to think about between now and the next episode, and always love to hear what you think about the draft, what you think about the trade options, what you think about what's going on in real baseball, and anything else you'd like to talk about in the comments section as well. Until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.